First tonight, the inaugural meeting of President Trump's Board of Peace is underway in Washington. In fact, it's just ended. Representatives from more than 24 countries are in attendance, originally conceived as a body that would oversee the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. The purpose of the Board of Peace seems to have extended to tackling conflicts all over the world. Mr. Trump has described it as one of the consequential international bodies in history, even though many major countries, most in Europe, have refused his invitation to join the board over concerns that it may try to replace the work of the United Nations. The UK has said it won't join because Russia has been invited to be a member. In a speech, Mr. Trump explained the body's goal. He also announced the US would provide $10 billion for the reconstruction of Gaza, with another $7 billion coming from board members.
Up with solutions. This is so little talk. This is very little talk, all action. First time, it was always talk in the Middle East. People would talk about peace in the Middle East, and then they'd go home and they'd never even think about it again. Nothing would happen. We're providing a model for how responsible sovereign nations can cooperate to take responsibility for confronting problems in their own regions. The Board of Peace is showing how a better future can be built, starting right here in this room. And I want to let you know that the United States is going to make a contribution of $10 billion to the Board of Peace. Thank you. And we've had great support for that number. And that number is a very small number when you look at that compared to the cost of war. That's 2 weeks of fighting. It's a very small number. It sounds like a lot, but it's a very small number. So we're committed to $10 billion. Together we can achieve the dream of bringing lasting harmony to a region tortured by centuries of war, suffering and carnage. They say 3,000 years. And hopefully we can lift up the eyes of the world to envision how other intractable conflicts can be settled. So many conflicts, they say, are impossible to settle, and we get them settled. We got, of those 8 that we settled, most of them were said to be not settlable. And they not only got settled, they got settled within days.
President Trump. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from New York by Arise special correspondent James Blue. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, James. Just tell us more about this Board of Peace and its inaugural meeting today in Washington. It is essentially Donald Trump's initiative and Donald Trump led, isn't it?
Yeah, it is Donald Trump led. Glad to be with you, Charles. I think the thing to know about the Board of Peace is that it is an alternative to the United Nations. As President Trump said in his speech, they want to look over the shoulder of the United Nations. And basically what they've done is to finance and to sort of shoehorn their way into global policy and shoehorn their way into areas, at least initially, that many other people and many other nations did not want to go. I would sort of suggest that the Board of Peace has developed because so many other nations within the UN framework have not wanted to do the hard things and to do the things in Gaza that the Board of Peace has said that they are willing to do. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. Charles, I just want to run over some of the nations that are involved in the Board of Peace. Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UAE, Hungary, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Qatar. None of the major U.S. allies are involved. None of the NATO allies are involved, although Turkey is involved a bit in NATO. And so there is this sense that this is a different grouping, a new grouping, and something that President Trump can control.
You might have mentioned this earlier, James, but originally it was under a UN mandate to oversee the reconstruction of Gaza and the implementation of the peace plan between Israel and Hamas. But it's kind of expanded beyond that, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's expanded beyond that because of the desires and goals and ambitions of its leader, Donald J. Trump. Interestingly, Charles, the Board of Peace is set up as this body that is going to be an overseer of things global. And, usually in these things, people are appointed and people have their position by virtue of the fact of the office they hold, not the Board of Peace. Donald Trump is the chairman of the Board of Peace, not because he's president, but because he's Donald Trump. And so potentially, when he leaves office, he could continue to hold this position. This is a very, very powerful body, and it's a powerful body that is going to sort of come up against the United Nations. At the same time, it is working to implement United Nations agreements and United Nations endorsed plans, specifically as it relates to Gaza. So it'll be very interesting to see how it develops and what, if any, conflicts come up. And we'll just have to wait and see.
And of course, with those potential conflicts, although they haven't been actualized, that you talked about sort of simmering in the background, it makes it rather controversial, doesn't it? I mean, 26 countries, you mentioned some of them, are confirmed to have joined it, but many nations, as you also mentioned, particularly European countries, NATO countries, have stayed away, partly because they are concerned about what President Trump's vision is, which is still very unclear.
Yes, Charles, you're absolutely right. The vision for the Board of Peace is very unclear, and I think it's given some pause. What President Trump is seemingly doing is creating his own sphere of power, his own sphere of influence, as the U.S. steps away from NATO, as the U.S. really tries to undermine and gut the United Nations, pulling out of agreements, pulling out of funding. What Donald Trump is doing is creating its own sort of vehicle for U.S. global dominance. And whether the Board of Peace will be that, we don't know, but it certainly seems as though it is the type of entity that President Trump is going to use to sort of insert his vision, his view, and his desires into pretty much any sphere and any sort of element in the world. I think one of the biggest concerns, especially for the European countries, is the fact that Russia is a member of the Board of Peace. And so I think it's very challenging for the sort of values of, we'd have thought, the US, but certainly for the values of the democracies in Europe. How could they join a quote unquote Board of Peace with countries like Russia, which are actively involved in fighting in Ukraine? So there are a lot of tensions, and we'll just have to see how they actually play out.
Yes, and that's an important point that you raised there, James. The other thing I was going to ask you is that you mentioned earlier that Donald Trump hopes to continue to lead this Board of Peace even after he's left office. But I mean, might that not come into conflict with, since he's trying to project American power, might that not come into conflict with whoever takes over next after him, assuming it's not, a Republican? I mean, if it was a Democrat, might there be conflict there, or is that a hypothetical situation at the moment?
No, Charles, I think you're absolutely right to flag the potential conflict that is on the horizon. It is very clear that Donald Trump is trying to find a way to keep his self and his sort of desires at the center of global attention and global importance. I believe he sees the Board of Peace as a way to do that. By naming himself and not the U.S. president as chairman of the Board of Peace, this is one way for him to continue, and it's a way for him to have influence that is beyond the sort of presidential power, influence with foreign leaders. And you can see a situation where the U.S. president, someone other than Donald Trump, may have a goal that is related to foreign policy that is different from Donald Trump and the Board of Peace. That would certainly be a conflict, and it's something that we really haven't seen. Of course, Charles, there have been think tanks and other groups that have sort of tried to coalesce U.S. interests, but nothing at this level in terms of with heads of state We haven't had that before. And I think that is what's truly different. And the fact that these heads of state can sort of buy their way into the Board of Peace. And so doing, it really is somewhat of a rogues gallery. Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia. These are not countries that you necessarily would think would be shoulder to shoulder with the United States in the sort of deployment of peace around the world.
And that's an interesting, some would say apt description there, James, rogues gallery. But there's also concern, isn't there, and I think you touched on that earlier, that this Board of Peace potentially undermines the United Nations.
Yeah, I think this really does point to a weakness within the United Nations. And one of the things Donald Trump is real superior at is sort of going for the weakest point and then exploiting it. Charles, as you know, there are very few people, very few countries, very few leaders willing to send folks into Gaza to really demilitarize Hamas and to sort of begin some sort of peaceful transition and reconstruction there. And so this hard task was taken on by the Board of Peace. And so Trump has gotten the Board of Peace a UN mandate to sort of clear things up and sort of pave the way for Gaza. In so doing, he is really clarifying how weak the United Nations is, that the United Nations itself could not find and could not get the troops, the leadership, the money, and the international support to do this. So instead, we have this team, this sort of ragtag group. There you have the president of Azerbaijan, you have the Saudi foreign minister. You have this ragtag group that's now responsible for it. And so in a way, the UN is responsible for this undermining of its own authority. And, I want people to recognize that, yes, Donald Trump is cunning, but he would not have a space to do any of this if the UN had not given the mandate to this body. And so we'll just have to see what happens and how things go. But just imagine if there's a conflict between something that the Board of Peace wants and something that the UN wants. At the end of the day, the Board of Peace are the ones on the ground. And I think you can imagine that they're the ones who are going to get and to do exactly what they want to do.
And James, before we let you go, in terms of its immediate challenges, I mean, that Board of Peace faces a big one in trying to disarm Hamas in Gaza, doesn't it? Amid reports that the armed group is regaining control in Gaza.
Yeah, I think this is obviously the big issue. And, you also have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also a member of the Board of Peace. He was not at today's signing ceremony. And, his interest is to continue to make sure Gaza is unstable, ungovernable, and sort of unreconstructable. And so what is he going to do to sort of make that happen? And how is he going to impact any activity that the Board of Peace tries to do within Gaza? We hear reports that Indonesian troops are going to go in. Indonesia, as you know, Charles, is the world's largest Muslim country. I think Indonesia has a history of doing sort of work like this in sort of conflict zones, but I'm not sure they have the experience in actually taking weapons away. And so it will be very, very tenuous. But I think because Donald Trump so wants this to work, that there is going to be a lot of pressure on all parties involved to get some result. I think President Trump is really focused on what can we do to get any result possible in Gaza. And I think that's what you're going to see play out in the coming days.
Well, James, you've certainly brought some clarity to the murky world of that Board of Peace, and thank you ever so much. James Blue is Arise special correspondent talking to me on the line there from New York.